Well, I think the journey of entrepreneurship is always interesting. As you know, anyone in a startup knows, there's peaks and valleys and challenges and things that happen. So I think that you learn a lot as an entrepreneur about what's really important in a business. And so, I think some of the themes of what I've learned is that culture is so important. People are everything in the company. And, for the first few years, I was really focused more on strategy and conversion optimization tactics and, how to get results. And I've realized that it's much more important to attract and grow great people who have the ability to be curious and learn and continue to improve what we're doing, and have a cohesive culture of just good people around. And so that was, I think, one of the most important things. I think also realizing that we have to keep innovating, that competitors will just copy what we do. All of our best ideas, are basically copied. And so we have to keep pushing forward and being on the leading edge of what experimentation means. And in the same vein, we've never actually just arrived, right? There's no arrival point where we've got ultimate success and stability. And so we always have to keep challenging ourselves to take the next hill and keep moving. And then personally, I think realizing that self-care is so important. I have to keep exercising. I have to keep my own meditation practice, my healthy habits, my keeping good relationships and friends, so that I can be the best leader I can be. I think as an entrepreneur, that's probably one of the most important things. Yeah, I think that what's different, when we started WiderFunnel in 2007, we had to sell everyone on the concept of experimentation and conversion optimization. Nobody understood, nobody had a line item on their budget for conversion optimization. And so we had to really sell the industry as and being needed. Today, companies understand. They know that they need to have experimentation as a core competency in their business, and they're looking for how to do that. I think they know that it's important, but there's still a big gap in the skill of creating a great experimentation program. And so a lot of companies have been focused on the tactics needed for testing and personalization, but actually building a program is much more involved than that. There's many components that have to be in place to have a great program that works across the organization. I absolutely believe that there is a better way to do things in terms of experimentation than others. It's not obvious. We've been focusing on how to create the process of optimization. And so what we've been developing is that, so a lot of it is public, and I've published a lot about the process, the experimentation operating system that we've developed. We've now, a couple of years ago, released the Infinity optimization process. That really shows a framework for how to think about how to alternate between an expansive mindset of looking for opportunities and a reductive mindset of validating and testing and looking at the data and making evidence-based decisions. And within that Infinity optimization process, there are many frameworks that answer the individual questions that any business owner needs. Like, how do I know what to test first? How do I identify opportunities for optimization? And so we've developed frameworks that answer each of those questions. And there's many more frameworks that we're continuing to develop as we come across these business questions. So a lot of these things are public. We've published them, but it has, so the practice of understanding the expertise of having a process is one of the important things that any business leader needs to understand and learn. Actually, that's something that I've been trying to answer over the last couple of years, and we've been doing a lot of research lately, looking at the best organizations in experimentation versus those that are just getting started or haven't achieved a high level of expertise. And we found 5 components that they need to have in place to have a great program. And I call it the Experimentation Packet. It's PACET. The process has to be in place, the right accountabilities, the right culture, the right expertise, and the right technology. And taking that, that's kind of one of the latest frameworks that we've developed, which is about looking internally at the organization and how do you identify what are the areas of focus that you need to have to increase your experimentation success and velocity. And so by looking at that packet, you can identify where are your constraint points, which is like where are your bottlenecks within your experimentation program that are stopping your velocity. And usually an organization will have one of those components that's the most important thing that's blocking them from having success. It might be culture. Maybe you don't have organizational buy-in. You might be accountability. You don't have the right roles in place or the right metrics, the overall evaluation criteria. You might not have the right technology or the right expertise. And so by identifying those, then you can focus on that, widen that area, and then once you've done that, something else will become the new constraint. And that concept is based on, it's actually a pretty old concept. It was like in the, I don't know, the 80s, I think there was a book by Eliyahu Goldratt called The Goal. And in that, he talks about this idea of the theory of constraints, which shows that in any manufacturing process, and I think of experimentation as a manufacturing process, you've got, potential insights at the top end and then validated insights at the bottom. And the theory of constraints says that in any manufacturing process like that, there's one constraint point. And so we've identified these 5 packet areas that are the main constraint points so that people can understand how to conceptualize where their barriers are. In the past, have a really good answer for that because I've been focused on high traffic brands because it's just a lot more fun to be experimenting with a lot of traffic. And we can validate a lot more things with statistical confidence. But I've realized that there are still high value companies that might not have a lot of that traffic. And so in the past couple of years, I've been focusing on how to answer that question. I don't think there's any reason for any company not to be focusing on evidence-based decision-making, which is how I sort of define this. I think of conversion optimization as one component of evidence-based decision-making. And so even if a company doesn't have, say, enough traffic to get high confidence in their experiments, there's no reason they can't be using small sample size feedback on variations. And there's no excuse for putting out ideas or variations without having some sort of testing involved. So what we've been focusing on is small sample size motivational testing, sort of like user testing, except tapping into motivational drivers. So we've developed a process called Motivation Lab, where we can gather that kind of emotional feedback about how different variations, how people respond to different variations based on their motivational type. And so something like that in the behavioral science area is where you can get a lot of deep feedback, what we call sort of deep rather than sort of shallow quantitative insights. So when you're testing, you're getting a lot of high validity but all you know is yes or no, like which one won. You don't know why. And so with small sample size motivational feedback, you can actually get very deep, rich understanding of a response from customers without having the confidence and validity of statistics, but very rich potential insights that you can then apply and continue to iterate on. So iterating with small sample size is the best method for low traffic, as well as, of course, like you've said, focusing on driving traffic higher so that you can then do statistical testing. I think that what I've learned is most important is that skills are can be learned, and so if ideally, if you can hire someone that has all of the skills and experience, and they've seen a lot of different patterns, and they've been able to test and optimize different business models and all of that kind of stuff, that's great. That's ideal. But more importantly than that is the right attributes and attitudes. And so, we've developed some of the world's leading experimentation conversion optimization teams. And what we do is not actually look for skills. We don't look for people that are trained and people that have a lot of experience. We look for people that have the right raw material, and then allow them to develop as they explore the opportunities. So what I look for is things like curiosity, humility, intelligence. Of course, you have to have grit. Never giving up until they find an answer. This idea of having sort of a maverick attitude of not accepting old ideas and challenging the old ways of doing things. Having a sense of integrity, doing what's best for everyone around them on the team and for clients. And authenticity, like being real people and communicating their truth. And so these kind of attitudes, if I can find that in a person, they'll quickly develop, and when they're pointed in the right direction, into one of the leading experts in the industry. It doesn't take that long for them to build the skills they need in the technology and framework thinking and all of the behavioral science and behavioral economic ideas. Well, they can read books and learn that stuff. That's not difficult. If they've got the right attitude, they'll get there. A few that come to mind. I think what I've seen is that the pattern of what's most interesting in experimentation right now is that it's moving beyond UX-based conversion optimization. So most CRO practitioners are still thinking in terms of user experience tactics. So they might be thinking about, form fields and pop-ups and buttons and with the right kind of headlines and images and messages and all that kind of stuff. And that's good, that's fine, and it's important, but that's just the base layer of the sort of facilitating transactions. But on the other side is much more interesting when you get into the science of behavior and why people act. So really digging into the motivation. And so we've developed a behavioral science department where we're actually developing the practices around these ideas. And so when you have behavioral science based insights that lead to the experiments that then validate which ones work for different types of personalities and emotional drivers, those are really interesting. And there are little things like, there's some case studies that we published, like for example with Heifer International. It's a nonprofit organization in the US, and we were able to increase donations by simply putting a survey on like a pop-up survey that asked people to identify themselves as a regular donor, a first-time donor, and the kind of donor that they are. And what it did, the reason we tested that is because we wanted to create a sense of personal identification with being a donor, so that then if they don't donate, it would create cognitive dissonance in their mind, and they would feel that they're not being true to themselves. And so once they've identified as a donor, they're actually 5% more likely to go ahead and donate within the same session. So those kind of insights can lead us to really understand the motivations and emotional drivers of why people act. And then, the how they do it is simply then a detail. That's one of the biggest challenges, and for optimization, like experimentation champions, there's a skill set involved in creating this organization-wide process. And so there are lots of different components, and I'll refer back to the framework for thinking about how to create a great optimization program. It's all about the packet components, like
Yeah.
looking for the right process, finding the right accountability structures. The culture is really important. I think that's partly what you're referring to. And that has to be driven from the top down. So getting senior level buy-in and support and direction for this as a strategy is really important to have everyone's support, throughout the organization, because experimentation does involve many different departments. You have to have design and brand, you have to have IT and technology, you have to have product and marketing involved, and they all have to agree who's going to be responsible for each component and how you're going to move things forward quickly. So having that cultural buy-in needs to be there, and then you have to have the right expertise in each of those areas to coordinate properly with the right accountabilities, and then of course the technology to facilitate that quickly. But I think a lot of times people look for technology first versus getting the right strategy and the right support in place first. Well, I think it depends on how much support they have and what their barriers are. If it's someone that's just becoming a champion, like, so assuming that they don't have a lot of organizational support yet, they have to go and sell this in. It's really going to be important for them to build a strong business case that they can seed the motivation and momentum within the organization. So starting with, what we can call skunkworks tests, where they can go and, maybe carve out a little bit of traffic that no one's going to notice, run some experiments, get some quick wins,
Right.
and then start shopping that around with, identifying who are the important leaders in the organization that you need to get support from, and getting them on board to being advocates for this as a strategy and a program. And I realized a few years ago that this was one of the most important barriers. Is it's not about the results, it's about organizational buy-in. And so there's actually a blog post that people can look to if they want. Like, I wrote 9 tips. It's 9 CRO champion strategies. There's a lot more written about that they can get into, but it's really about buy-in and momentum at the end. Yeah, it's changed dramatically over the years. In 2000, the early 2000s when we started, it was really an analytics exercise. It was a tactic within the analytics department. And now, Forrester reports on experimentation being a core of the insight-driven business as a strategy. And so they talk about being customer obsessed, being an insight-driven businesses. These kind of businesses get dramatically better results than businesses that don't have this customer obsessed, insight-driven strategy. And at the core of the insight-driven strategy is actually experimentation. That's what Forrester talks about. And so this is now a strategic level imperative, not just a backroom tactical thing. And so companies realize as a strategy, we have some of the biggest Fortune 500 companies coming to us and saying, hey, we know we need this as a strategy. Help us to build this program within the organization. That's completely different than it was in 2007 when it was like, hey, we need to find out what the best button color is. So it's a different mindset. So now it's not just UX testing on landing pages. It's about organization-wide understanding that when you have an idea, you have to respond, like I said in my book in 2013, with you should test that, right? So everyone should be testing all of these strategies as well as the tactics. And what's exciting now is that everyone has bought into that idea. Now we just need to help them to implement it throughout the companies.
Fresh Marketer,